Hello, hello, and welcome to the Finding the Unicorn in You podcast. What a beautiful day to inspire lives. My name is Jaime G, Raygoza, your host, and I am so excited to have you here. Let's get ready to meet some fantastic unicorns and learn how to unleash the inner unicorn in you. Let's get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Finding the Unicorn in You. Today, I have a very special guest. She is Detroit-born, an author, podcaster, advocate, and TEDx speaker. She lives a confident, visible, and successful male-to-female dual-gender life. Through a lifetime of experience and research, she has come to understand too many reasons men need to express more feminine persona, the struggles and fears that they face, and the weight of the transgender labels they accept, but may not truly fully understand. She's going to talk so much more about this and her award-winning Living with Crossdressing book series, along with her TED Talks that she's done. She's just an amazing person, has done so much advocacy, and I'm in awe that she's even here. Without further ado, I have Savannah Hauk.
First of all, amazing. Thank you. It is my honor to be on with you. I cherish any time I can get a chance to share with people. Thank you for the introduction. It's funny when I hear you spout off all the things that are on my resume. I feel like an imposter. We'll probably talk about that a little bit later. I'm so happy to be here and have this chat because I want to be a unicorn and I want to be able to let other people be unicorns.
You're definitely a unicorn, and I can be a testament to that just from everything that I've seen. And hopefully by the end of the episode, everybody will realize that as well. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your journey and what got you here?
Once upon a time, I was born. And after that, I was born in the 70s, early 70s, in the conservative Midwest, pre-internet. So when I was 5 or 6 years old is really when I had this draw to the feminine, had a draw to wanting to try on those clothes. Didn't really understand why that was the case, but it was just something that I felt was right for me. Flash forward to pre-adolescence and teenage years and adolescence and early 20s, I was delving more and more into going into my sister's drawer and my mom's closet and trying on heels and undergarments and outfits and swimsuits and just having this confidence and comfort of dressing in this way. It wasn't even like fetishistic. It was just comforting to be dressed this way. And I still didn't know why. Even as a child, with your only role models or access is like Tootsie and Bosom Buddies and Some Like It Hot, which I hadn't seen till way later. But like those were your milestone or your icons to look up to. And they were always doing it for deception or trying to get something out of it. So even though I saw men dressed as women, I never saw somebody dressed as a woman earnestly, for a reason that was genuine to them. It was always for some other gain or scheme. So while I saw it, I still was very detached from that idea. So growing up in the Midwest, as I said, it was very humbling and lonesome. And pre-internet, you didn't know there was other people like you. Or if you heard about it, it was very taboo and stigmatized and fetishistic. And these were what people did as a kink, like almost BDSM. It was something like that. It was like you wanted to distance yourself from that because that didn't feel right for you. So going forward in my mid-20s, I moved to New York. As you might expect when you move to New York in the 90s, Lucky Chang's had just opened up. So I saw my first drag queens. You go to the Lower East Side, you're seeing two men holding hands or a guy walking down the street in a mesh top, in a skirt, in heels, but just no makeup. All of a sudden, this world opened up to me. It's like, oh my God, what is it? This is what could be. These were people living an earnest, authentic life. As a result, it got me to start thinking about my life and recognizing that I did have an association. I did have an affinity to those people in different ways. And that's when I truly, like at the age 25, 26, I actually out loud said to myself, I am a transvestite, because that's the only word I knew at the time, which felt gross and icky and clinical. So I quickly went and adopted crossdresser, not realizing that term would actually be an albatross for the next 25 years, because as you may or may not know, crossdressing is not a gender. Crossdressing is an art form. Like drag queens are using our form of cross-dressing to become fabulous and amazing. People who are transitioning use cross-dressing to discover that they really are in their own bodies and then choose to make all the steps biologically to make that alignment more true to themselves. In a way, I think RuPaul said it on Geraldo years ago that we're all born naked and everything we do from there is cross-dressing. It is really true. It's really true. It's like what we wear based on the culture we live in the society and culture and everything that puts it together. It's like how we dress is all been first out by how we grew up. So yes, if we were Scottish in Braveheart times, we'd be wearing kilts and nobody be telling us anything because a broadsword would be coming down on your skull. But yet somehow here in Western culture to wear a skirt is demeaning and gross. So long story short, a couple of years ago, I moved to South Carolina. So I moved from a very liberal, welcoming. I had my own community and bubble in New York. We'd go to private events. I'd go to clubs, mostly in cover darkness because still it was fine. I was able to go to these events and enjoy myself and be Savannah. But then I moved to South Carolina, which is where really probably the majority of this conversation is going to lead into. It's like becoming a unicorn for me. I felt that coming to South Carolina was really that eye-opening moment that turned everything in my life for like how I should present myself, how I should conduct myself, how I should be visible, how I should advocate. It really all came from coming down here to South Carolina, to a very conservative part of the country.
Thank you so much for sharing that. For you, what was the aha moment or like the pivot that you'd say that really put you to write a book, to start a podcast, to even go into these TEDx talks? Because you put yourself in a place where you're being so vulnerable. You're sharing your life story. You're sharing these personal details that many of us only wish we could do. So what made you say, I am going to do this to help others and to really educate people?
Ironically, I never thought I was going to be an advocate. I didn't think anything I did was going to be advocacy. I didn't think it was going to be education. I didn't think it was going to be anything far reaching. I wrote my first book up in New York, and it really stemmed from the fact that my girlfriend, I told her about Savannah very early on when we were getting more serious. And I pointed her to other resources and materials to try to get her to understand who I was. Unfortunately, that backfired because all those materials really didn't speak to the non-transitioning, cross-dressing male and female person I am. And so as a result, I had a couple uphill battles that I had to fight to unteach her what she read and say, no, that yes, you read that, but that's not me. And as a previous writer and movie review blogger, I already had it in me to write. And I felt that only just for her, basically, and for people like her, my girlfriend, to better understand what cross-dressing is and how that can be in a relationship. So I actually, in New York, wrote that book over a period of a few months to it did interviews with couples, married couples that the wife found out or was told about the husband's cross-dressing 30 years into the marriage. And what does that look like? And how are they contending with that? And how are they grieving and coming to a consensus about it? So with those people in that bubble in that network I created for myself and aligned myself to, I was able to get a lot of material. So I wrote that first book, but it was really about trying to get people, even in my immediate circle, to understand that what they had learned or the materials out there really don't speak to the non-transitioning gender diverse person. So that was the first one. So there really was no aha moment other than, man, as a writer, I probably should be writing something that's a little more relevant to me because I haven't found it out there for me. But then moving to South Carolina, you want to talk about aha moment. I spent the first 6 months for the move to from New York to South Carolina. Savannah was put away. I could not find other cross-dressers. I could not find other circles of cross-dressers. I could not find anything that resembled what I had left behind. And moving from a New York City, Manhattan, Long Island area to the upstate of South Carolina, I had a lot of preconceptions about, now I'm in the Bible Belt, very Baptist. They carry guns. They're very conservative, Confederate flags, good old boys, pickup trucks, all those things that you assume the South is. I was like, why does it feel like Tu Wong Fu? Why do I feel like I'm going to have this journey where I'm going to be looked at in such a vile way that I retreated back into my house, into my apartment, because I couldn't think I would be safe out in public. So it took me months to find an LGBTQ plus meetup group. I met people at PFLAG as a result, and I realized there's a huge community who are not just male and female cross-dressing people, that are people of trans kids, parents of trans kids. There's gay and lesbians. There's trans masculine and feminine people, like this huge community down here that I finally realized, wow, this is huge. This is like bigger than I ever imagined. Even if I never found somebody who looked just like me, it was just a bigger community I could feel comfortable and safe in. There was a Pride event in Spartanburg County. And as a result, the next speaker like me says, what did you learn? What do you want to take away from that Pride event? And I said, honestly, I think it's important for me to become more visible. And I set a course to go out at least once a week, usually on Sunday, hashtag Savannah Starbucks Sunday. And I went out almost every Sunday, whether I wanted to or not, to just be visible, go to the coffee shop, have my computer, have my coffee, do some writing, do some research, whatever it might be, and just be visible. And I started seeing more and more that all my preconceptions of what I thought the South would be like on a person-to-person level was wrong. Like, they did not treat me as some creeper and some fetishistic pedophile or like something gross and disgusting to be shunned. And I didn't see them as having pitchforks and Bible thumping and ready to rail me out of town. So all of a sudden that became a milestone, a lightning rod of, wow, I was wrong. They don't see me as what I expected. I don't see them. They are not being the way I expected. All my notions are completely out the window. And met so many lovely people in my travels, which really saddens me, because with all these bills and drag show bans and drag queen story hour bans that so many states are trying to put through, from a person to person level, I don't see that. Like, the people I find in Starbucks in other places are not those people. And these are just regular folk. These are not trans folk. These are not LGBTQ plus allies necessarily. They're just people I meet who are interested. They ask me questions. I'm happy to answer. And that, like I said, my visibility and want to answer anything you want to ask me really has just continued accelerate my want to be, I don't know, this person, this uniform, this somewhat of whatever you want to call it. Just an example that if I could go and sit down in a coffee shop and you could clock me, whether you do or not, and other people can see that there's somebody just living their life in the world without regret and without hesitancy, on a very underlying subconscious and in the mind level, I feel like I can be changing minds and setting an example that other people can say, if Savannah could do it, I can do it.
I remember the first time that I wanted to wear a gay shirt. I was so nervous just wanting to wear that in public, because I have experienced some discrimination, like going on dates and people just yelling at me and trying to kick us out of the establishment. So it was years after, and I was like, let me try to wear this. And it's one of the most scariest moments, because you don't know, am I going to be beat up? Am I going to potentially be threatened? I don't know what's going to happen. So I could only imagine you being in a state that was not known for being most liberal, and just saying, I'm going to do this and I'm going to put myself out there and let's see what happens. It must have been super terrifying.
It was actually my first TEDx. It's North Carolina State TEDx. My whole thing was about this monster in the closet mentality, and how my girlfriend had asked me was at Starbucks, and she asked me to go to the store to get feta cheese. And so it was at a Walmart. That was the closest grocery store. And I went, and it took me 5 minutes to get out of my car because I was terrified to make that walk. While I was completely comfortable in Starbucks, knowing how Starbucks is and how they feel about the community, I did not know what to expect in Walmart and what would be allowed and if I would be protected in any way. So that first time of walking into Walmart to get feta cheese was something that was heart palpitating, because you're talking about wearing a shirt that's related to gay or pride. I am like head to toe showing off who I am. I would tell you two things. One, I was the best dressed person in that Walmart that day. Two, I could not find the feta cheese. It's a typical man thing to do. Can't find anything. So I called my girlfriend. I'm on the phone. I'm talking like this, wearing this beautiful dress and heels. And I'm like, hey, I can't find feta cheese. I'm like walking up and down the cheese section of the refrigerated section. And I finally said, oh, there it is. Okay, great. Thanks. Bye. And nothing happened other than a few errant stares, probably because they heard a voice in a presentation that really didn't match their expectation. Got in line, standing behind this very lovely older gentleman who probably in life is very friendly to everybody they meet. He has all his stuff on the conveyor. He turns around from his car to me, 180, and he says, hi, how you doing? I'm like, I'm good. How are you? And he heard my voice, saw my face. It did that 180 right back around. And it was as if he had never made a comment to me. He just like shut down and went back to looking at his stuff being conveyed through the scanner. So that was sad because he was obviously had a lot of things integrated and indoctrinated into his thinking that he saw that in me. And that was something that pulsed him that he was not okay with. And so in that regard, I was upset that it happened, but it was funny anecdote actually at the end of the day that it did happen because he wasn't mean. He didn't lash out at me, but you could tell very quickly his attitude about people like me, but he just turned back around and didn't say another word. So sadness that he didn't want to open himself up to a conversation, which is fine because not everybody's like ready for a conversation like that in life. But two, the fact that the attitude still persists in that way.
Yeah, I completely get that. Sometimes I would prefer them keeping it to themselves versus them going out of their way to make you feel comfortable, make you feel like you don't belong. Even though I don't approve of that either. I think we still have a long way to go, but I think that's like the better half of the two evils of making people feel at least somewhat uncomfortable by not saying anything.
I agreed of the two choices. I would agree with that. But also that middle ground choice, which I've experienced at a Starbucks, where this woman in the table next to me says, hey, I'm a really ardent Baptist, religious, and a Republican, but can I ask you a question? I'm like, sure. And we had a lovely conversation about what it is like to be me. We talked about Drag Queen Story Hour because I had protested the protest at the Drag Queen Story Hour in Greenville that year, which is a whole turmoil. And all these kids want to do is just see like a fabulous princess read to them. And the idea that her understanding of Drag Queen Story Hour was that by exposing kids to somebody dressed in drag, that it would all of a sudden make these kids gay. That it would all of a sudden, like these little boys who had never thought a day in their life about wearing a dress would want to wear a dress. And I tried to say, it's like, this is not a contagion. This is not something that rubs off on people. Like you could have a young little boy who follows their sister around and wants to be like sister and mommy. And sister and mommy wear heels. I want to wear their heels and hear that click on the linoleum. Or I want to wear the princess dress because they're wearing it and they're having a great time. How often do they grow out of that in a year? Because they had their fun. They were mimicking what they saw from their parents or older siblings. And they're fine. And now they're on the NFL football team. Whatever. I was like, they retain their masculinity with no threat because they decided to put on, if you want to call it a costume or something feminine, did not deter them to become the person they were meant to be. So it is a very strange world we live in where this sexualization of children, which is the quote unquote reason for these bans and bills being put through. But yet we see those little teeny pageants where you got these 6-year-olds dressed up in high makeup and like false teeth to show they're like pageant queens. You have halftime shows with all the NFL cheerleaders wearing very scantily clothes and gyrating. You have artists on stage at the hugest arenas in your city or your state, like putting on very risque shows for mass audiences. MTV, you have all these things already out there. You're telling me that this is the thing that's going to sexualize kids? So I don't think that specifically is the problem. I think they're using it as a cover to undermine other things. And I think most of us in the community are aware that those other things are not sexualization of children, but trying to eliminate anybody who wants to be non-binary.
Yeah, I completely agree. there has to be that middle ground where if they're not okay with something or they find something is odd to them, then just ask it in an appropriate way. Go in with an open mind wanting to learn and not to be prejudiced and not to be mean to the other person or disrespectful. I learned something a long time ago. Fear is ignorance and vice versa. Ignorance fuels fear and fear fuels ignorance. People are afraid of what they don't know. So they start acting on this fear, but all they have to do is ask, please educate me on this. And you notice that layer starts lowering and their misconceptions of you are no longer there. I know I've had the same question that you've had. What made you want to do this? And I had a person come up to me saying, what made you gay? What kind of trauma did you go through that made you gay? I'm just like, what are you talking about? There doesn't have to be a significant event in my life that made me this way. I've always felt like this since I was born, since I could remember. It makes it frustrating sometimes to want to explain, but I'd rather have to explain myself 1,000 times and educate 1,000 people than them spreading that knowledge than me still living this life. I don't know if you would agree with me in that.
I do agree. Actually, 2 points. One, yes, you cannot deny that some people are who they are based on trauma. Especially in cross-dressing, there are people who had very traumatic childhoods who use cross-dressing as an escape from the traumas of their life. We have people who just don't know how to process correctly, and they use this as a mechanism for comfort, for de-stressing, for serenity. So there is that component. It does exist. We're not saying it doesn't exist, but I knew this at age of 5. I didn't know what it was called. I did not have the language to describe it, but I knew who like you said, I was born this way. This was just part of who I am. So for me, yes, there was no trauma involved. You're not going to go back and find that I wasn't hugged enough, or that my uncle came and did something inappropriate to me, or that my parents loved my sisters more. So I wanted to emulate that so I could be loved. That's not my story. I totally agree, but I don't want to discount there can be trauma components. Absolutely. And those should be psychologically analyzed and worked through to figure out what is best and healthiest for you, whether it is continuing to dress in a feminine manner or a non-binary manner or something different. That being said, yes, absolutely right. The fuel of fear is ignorance and vice versa. But I will go one step further in that most people who want to claim they're not ignorant find all the information that supports their fear. We know 10,000 articles about what makes a non-binary person disgusting and taboo and fetishistic, because that's all they want to read. They want to read things that endorse and support what they fear. So it is very difficult to get somebody to read one article that says the opposite and give it its due and give it its time to sun, a time of process and time to say, oh, okay, that's a different viewpoint. And unfortunately, there are so many people mired in their own point of view. They don't want to have engagement to the other side. They don't want to have that conversation that you're very open to want to have with them. For instance, I went to that counter protest of that drag queen story hour in Greenville in Five Forks, and bullhorns, people looking very militia-ish with their fatigues. There was a local politician with this huge van supporting. There was Bible groups and preachers and prayer circles and signs, all demonizing drag queens. In the sea of all that, there was this woman who was joining the fray to the opposition side. And I saw her standing there and she was just looking at me. And she looked very forlorn, very sad. So I went up to her and I said, "Hey, you okay?" And she says to me, "I am so sorry for how my church group is treating you." The sadness of the realization of how the position her parishioners were taking and the futility and vileness of how they were presenting themselves against us. I'm not saying you can't have a protest, but just how they were just aggressive and just almost they don't want you to exist, as we've said before. And the way she saw them treating us, she was saddened by what she was seeing for the people that she was aligning herself with. And she was apologetic about how they were treating us. And she just wanted to understand better. I was new. This was right when I was coming out being visible. So I would have loved to have taken her back to the Starbucks on the other side of the shopping mart and had a conversation with her, I would have loved that. But just the apology and the hug that we shared kind of made the entire event for me worthwhile, because again, it was that one voice, that one person that you reach, not by being belligerent, but just by being. And it was like the little ray that possibly she would go back to her church and be like, why are we doing this the way we're doing this? We just need that one voice to stand up and be, yeah, maybe we should take another look at this.
That's the whole thing, that why we do what we do, because you're not going to be able to change the masses all at once. It's always one person at a time. And just being able to have that little light bulb click with everything that you've known and all the knowledge that you've gathered over the years, if you can go back in time and give yourself a piece of advice that would help you significantly live your authentic lifestyle, what would it be?
If I were to go back and tell my younger self, one, those same tropes of, yes, it'll get better, be you, you're going to face hardship, you're going to face opposition, you're going to face hate, you're going to face all the things that I'm still facing now. Those things haven't gone away. But what I could tell my younger self is that be true to who you are. Do not detour from it. You need to unlearn what you're being told. You need to cast that not aside, but cast it to the side in order to also learn the things that are most important to your identity, most important to your authenticity, because we are always told to be something different. We're always told that in order to be socially accepted, you need to follow these tenets of the culture and of society. And what that only tells us is that we should hide who we are. If we don't follow the things that make us acceptable, we should be hidden away, which is why so many parents put their kids into conversion, talk therapy or religious conversion or shock therapy, whatever it might be, because I'm not saying the parents are malicious. I will say that they are doing it because they don't want their child to be ostracized. They don't want their child to suffer. And that is a very valid thing. We all look at people like, I can't believe you put your child in conversion therapy. Just because, one, they're ignorant to what is out in the world. But two, they also know in that ignorance that to be gay, to be non-binary is in fact something you are going to struggle 10 times as hard to live with. But if you can ignore the 10x struggle component and say, by you being your most authentic self and having confidence in that authentic self and radiating that to people, that's going to take at least half that 10x away, because one, you're not going to give a shit what people say about you or what they think about you, because you are being your best person, your best self, your best life. And that speaks internally in your heart, your soul, and your spirit. That is something that will carry you so much farther than just hedging around corners and being really tentative with your steps. And, oh, let me go from the garage to the car so nobody sees me being me. It was like the idea in my own life that I've had my girlfriend go downstairs in the apartment, make sure the coast was clear so I could go run out to the car so nobody would ask questions about who this woman who looked like your boyfriend was. Or making sure that I'm in my car, in my garage, and make sure nobody's around that, hey, why is that woman driving his car? I've gotten over that. If you see me and you have a question about it, I have so much love for myself. You have to be your truth. Speak your truth, live your truth, be your truth. And as long as you're not harming yourself or harming others, which is always that one caveat I'm going to put in, by harming others, I'm not talking about their gasping their pearls. I don't know what to deal with this. Not that harming others. I don't care about what others' opinions are. I can't believe you dress that way. I don't care about that. But if you're not physically harming others and you're just living your best life, that's all I would want my younger self to know, so that they could start that path so much earlier in life. And I wouldn't be 45 before I come to South Carolina and spend 6 months in my apartment being terrified somebody might look at me wrong. And I could just be living this life the whole time.
I love all of that. And this next question is going to be a little hard just because of everything that's going on, especially with all of the laws that are being put against for trans kids. If you can give advice to a young kid right now who may be having questions about this, that want to start experimenting with the way that they look, who they are, because they feel that they are this way, or they don't feel comfortable in the way that they're dressing now or the body that they're in now, what would be the first step that you would want them to take to that they can start living their authentic lifestyle?
It's so hard because, as we both know, being a trans youth or non-binary youth is not easy because we still live in a society where we find so many of our youth kicked out of their own homes because of trying to share that with parents that are supposed to love them unconditionally, but can't deal with this one thing. That's why the suicide rate, according to the Trevor Project, is like a factor of this youth, the magnitude where trans kids are in themselves and struggling and don't have the support systems with the people who should support them most. It's dire. So with that being said, with that knowledge, I was always hidden away from my parents. My first TEDx talks about, at the very end of that TEDx, talks about my parents will probably never see this, but if they do, I'll deal with it then. My parents don't know. I'm 50 years old and my parents don't know of the work I do. They don't know my advocacy. They don't know about my successes and people I'm helping. So even me as a youth, I did not open up to anybody in my most private, most important familial circle where I should have had their support because I knew how my parents were. They were very much those people who would talk about the little boy across the street wearing heels while we're playing school. It's like, oh, I think that little kid, he's going to be gay. Just the way they talked about it, red flags for me. The way you talked about the neighbor kid just out in the open in front of me without even thinking about it made me realize, yeah, I don't think I'm going to tell you about the fact that I like wearing my sister's clothes. I don't think it would have gone well at all. So what would I tell them? I mean, the first steps is, I would say, find a community, find support, because in the Western culture, we have Maslow's pyramid. And this is about what are the things that you need to have in order to self-actuate. You need shelter, you need security, you need support. So many of us deal with not having any of those when it comes to our gender identity or sexual identity. With that being said, you have to find something. You can't do it in a vacuum. You can't just magically say, I'm going to be me. It's a rare case. You would be a true unicorn if you were 10 years old saying, nope, I don't give a shit what anybody says. This is me. Take it or leave it. That's rare. That's super, super rare. But I would say we have the internet now. We have meetup groups. We have PFLAG. We have communities out there. And I'm not saying you're going to find that in the middle of Idaho necessarily. So yes, I know there's still limitations, but you can find online groups that will support and endorse and help you with who you are. And it's not grooming people. I hate the idea of grooming because I went to Lutheran church. That's also grooming. My parents raised me a certain way. That's also grooming. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but people have to stop using this vernacular as a demonization. But I would say find a community, find people that can support you unconditionally and allow you that ability and breadth to explore and experiment, because it's only clothing. For people who are 10, 12, 14 years old, this is not a sexual awakening necessarily. It's about, I'm trying to understand my body and how I live in it. Whatever happened to the 80s and 90s where goth was all the rage? Boys were wearing eyeliner and makeup, looking like the Cure every day going to school. It's like, why was that okay? But this isn't. So this is just another form where you have to find that group, that clique, if I have to say that. If you're not a jock, and you're not a prep, and you're not a mean girl, if you want to be goth or you want to be androgynous or you want a little boy look like Annie Lennox or Boy George, the 80s was wrought with little boys dressing like people they saw in musicians. So it exists. It's out there. It's just that you have to take it, and whether you have to hide it, which would be very unfortunate, but just find those ways to express yourself freely. And that way you will find if it's true for you. Just allow yourself those pockets of just safety to be able to express yourself and find out who you are.
I love that. You have to be able to find a safe place to do it because it can become very dangerous, especially where you live and who you're around if you don't protect yourself first, physically, mentally, socially. So make sure you find a safe space. And if you have to wait a certain age for you to be able to do that, then sometimes it's better waiting than risking yourself and your safety.
It's true. It's a fine line. It's a very double-edged sword of, I want it now because I feel it now versus that self-preservation because you're in a very unforgiving environment. And we hear that so often too. There's very much people who were going to meetings that were trans youth, but would only act that way at those meetings and then have to undo all that stuff to go home and act quote unquote normal. And so we get that. Yeah, I would absolutely agree with you that safety first, but safety for safety's sake, not safety out of fear. We're very self-aware, I think, people like us, because we deal with the nuances of how and where to become ourselves or be ourselves. And it's a very unfortunate side effect that we learn how to compartmentalize, that we learn how to self-preserve. And these are things you should, as a kid, have to do. I shouldn't be 14 years old with this constant head on a pivot, head on a swivel, trying to gauge my environment at all times to see if I'm safe when I'm sitting at home. Those things shouldn't be things that kids should worry about. But when it comes to people like us, it is part of the vernacular, part of the development of our minds, of how we treat people. And it's not healthy necessarily going forward. I'm in therapy now where we're talking about like how I had to adapt in order to feel safe in my own skin in a house with loving parents, but just loving parents who did not really allow that trans or LGBTQ was okay. So yeah, it's definitely very important to make sure that they operate in a safe space, but please, please, please know that these things we have to develop in order to survive may bite us in the ass in the future. So just be aware that compartmentalization, learning to put everything back exactly the way you found it, learning to be completely self-aware in your surroundings, those things are true things to have and great things to have, but just make sure that it doesn't cause you additional trauma in different ways.
Exactly. I've been out for 12 years. I still sometimes, less often, but sometimes I see myself deepening my voice around men or acting a little bit more masculine than I would regularly do it, or just dressing a certain manner for a certain event. And it's so subconscious that because you've done it so often and it's like a defense mechanism that sometimes it's not needed. And like you said, there's a difference between doing stuff because you need to be safe and like trying to be safe because you're just afraid.
Yes. Yes. I don't like locker room talk. I've never been that guy. I don't really care about off color talking about women. I'm much more comfortable around women. Absolutely. I always have been, even in middle school, high school, always had a draw to women because just the way they were as part of their mental makeup. Whereas guys were always primping and pluming and always being, oh, I got proof something. I was like, that never appealed to me. It seemed very toxic. And I'm not saying it's toxic masculinity, but I am saying that it felt toxic to me because it's definitely not something I wanted to be a part of. I have found both to be true, that I try to butch up a little around men, especially in the office, and you got to hang with the boys and say certain stupid things or laugh at the jokes. And that's not appropriate either, actually, because they think they can get away with it. But I found the opposite to be true too, where I was sitting in an executive meeting and I found that I'm sitting there and I'm listening to the presentation, watching the slide deck go by. Here's the quarterly numbers. I looked down and I had my hand over my other hand with my legs crossed at the knee in a very feminine way. And I looked down and saw what I was doing. And I, as quickly and discreetly as I could, butched up my mannerisms because I was afraid what people might think if they saw me sitting there, sitting like a girl. And it was a scary moment because it was that fear of, oh, what are they going to say if they see me this way? Even though I was totally dressed in male mode, nobody would have known different. I got a scruff on my face. It wouldn't have been a problem. But I was fearful of what they might think. And again, that's something, like you said, we have to try to be ourselves without worrying, again, without that worry about what people may think, because at the end of the day, we don't live with anybody but ourselves.
Exactly. Exactly. I really love this conversation. I can probably talk to you for so much more. I might even bring you back on.
I'm having a great time. And just for all the listeners, we had a series of questions and I think we only hit 3 of them.
Mm-hmm.
So I would love to come back and talk more about whatever topic. Absolutely.
Yes, I'll definitely be reaching out. But for anybody that wants to stay in contact with you or may have questions or just want to get connected with you, where can they do so online?
Okay, do you have another half hour? Because here we go. You can find me on Facebook at Savannah Hauk, and that's Hauk. Savannah, 2 N's, 1 H. Also at Living with Crossdressing on Facebook. Also Fox and Phoenix Podcast on Facebook. Also have an Instagram that is Savannah Hauk. And then my co-host and I share the Fox and the Phoenix podcast on Instagram. You can find me at livingwithcrossdressing.com, my website. If you are looking for my books, you can find them under Savannah Hauk at Amazon for print and digital download, as well as other outlets that are digital download only. You can find the Fox and the Phoenix podcast on Spotify, Anchor, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and other streaming services. And if you want to see the TEDx talks, just go to YouTube and you can put in Savannah Hauk TEDx and you'll see the two that I've done.
Perfect. And I'll link all of these into the show notes so people can easily just click them and then go through it. So you don't have to be writing this meticulously down really quick. But thank you so much. And if you have to give one last piece of advice that you want people to leave from this podcast, what would it be?
I would say, because I run into this in my life with cis women, with men, with trans people, with everybody I live, we all have the same problem. And the problem is we're so worried about being us because of judgment. So I want to say to every listener, gay, straight, hetero, whatever it is, whoever you are, be your truest, best self, because in that way, you'll be the happiest, you'll be the most content, and you'll probably be the most adventurous and thoughtful and kind and willing to be better. So if you can just find it in yourself, I think you are going to go a long way to just being a perfect human being.
I love that. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate everything and all the advice you gave out. And for listeners, feel free to leave us a 5-star review and hit that subscribe button. And as always, episodes come out every Friday at 7 a.m. Thank you so much, and we'll talk soon.
Bye.
Bye.